David Skidmore. In today's lesson, we're going to be talking once again about interval changes. We're also going to be talking about tenutos and accent marks and how those play out in the creation of musical phrases. And for the first time in this series, we're also going to be talking about mallet selection. Throughout this lesson, your left hand will play double vertical strokes while your right hand is playing double lateral strokes. The first exercise in this lesson is just an excerpt from the Etude, and it gives us a chance to warm up our hands and to get used to this combination of different stroke types. My right hand is a pretty continuous motion. There's not a hard stop at the end of one double lateral stroke before the next double lateral stroke starts. But rather there's a connection between the end of one double lateral stroke and the beginning of the next one. In a similar way, my left hand also has a very smooth and continuous motion. I like to think of this motion in my left hand sort of similar to the way that you would bounce a ball. If you were going to bounce a ball, you would use just enough muscle to send the ball down to the ground so that it bounced back up and met your hand so that you could send it back down to the ground again. If you're doing a series of double vertical strokes, it's a very similar type of motion. You want to use just enough energy, just enough muscle to send the mallets down to the marimba to play the note so they bounce back up to you. You don't want to overexert it. You don't want to use more muscle or more force or more tension than is necessary to play the notes. You'll notice in this lesson that we play in the very highest register of the marimba, and therefore it's a great time to talk about mallet selection. The mallets I've been using for pretty much all of the lessons so far in this series are the Robert Van Cise model M113s. That's a mallet of medium hardness, and it works in a lot of different musical situations on the marimba. But listen to the sound that I get when I use these medium mallets in the first few measures of the Etude that's a part of this lesson. Now listen to that same passage with a different, harder set of mallets. I'm going to use Robert Van Cise model M115s in my right hand and model M114s in my left hand. So the left hand mallets are slightly softer because I'm playing in a slightly lower register, but these mallets in my right hand are slightly harder because I'm in this very high register on the marimba. Let's hear what this sounds like. Even when I'm playing really quiet, I still got a lot of tone out of the marimba bars with these harder mallets, compared to the softer mallets I was using before when I got a thuddy sound that I don't really like that much. It's a good general rule that the higher you're playing in the marimba, the harder your mallets are, and the lower you're playing in the marimba, the softer your mallets are. Now, for many beginning students, you only have one set of mallets, and that's totally cool and totally understandable. If you have a really nice medium set of mallets like the Robert Van Cise M113s, those will work for you in a lot of different situations. But the longer you play, the more you'll want to experiment with different types of mallets, and there's so many types of mallets. There are mallets with a core, the part that's underneath the yarn here, that's made out of plastic, mallets that have a core that's made out of rubber, mallets that are really tightly wound yarn, mallets that are really loosely wound yarn. There are different types of yarn that get different sounds. Choosing your mallets is one of the most important ways to find your sound on this instrument, so I really encourage you to try as many different mallet types as you can. Maybe your school owns a bunch of different sets of mallets. You should try all those out. Maybe you have a teacher or a friend who has different mallets than you have. Be sure to try those out. And of course, at some point in your life, you'll want to own a big set of mallets that'll create a whole lot of different sounds for all different types of music on the marimba. Now let's talk about interval changes. The music that's in this lesson will ask you to change intervals in both your hands, but you'll only be changing intervals in one hand at a time. The next couple of exercises will work on these various interval changes. In warm-up number 2, the right hand is changing intervals in a stepwise motion. So in other words, there are no big leaps, but rather that outside mallet stays stationary while the inside mallet walks down the marimba in a stepwise motion, just going down the scale. Because the right hand almost never stops once it gets started in this Etude, it presents some interesting challenges. Watch me play warm-up exercise number 2. My right hand starts with a thumb pretty far over to the right. And the reason for that is the way I make these interval changes is I roll that inside mallet between my thumb and my first finger. So if I start at this narrowest interval of a perfect fourth, with my thumb stationed really far to the right, I've got plenty of room to stretch all the way to the octave without having any tension or discomfort in my hand. If I start with my thumb too far to the left, then once I get to about here, I don't have any more room to roll the mallet between my thumb and first finger. So the only way to expand the interval at that point is to create a lot of tension in my hand that I don't want. In warm-up number 3, the interval changes are in the left hand. And you've got more time to make these interval changes than you do in the right hand, but the same principles apply. You want to start at your narrowest interval with your thumb in a position such that when you get to the widest interval, your hand will be super comfortable and able to play without any tension. The most important thing through all of this is that I'm staying very relaxed while I'm playing all these interval changes. If when you're working on these exercises you feel unwanted tension creep in, take a pause, reevaluate, talk to your teacher, find a way to make these interval changes happen without really tensing up your hands. You'll find tenutos throughout this etude, and the tenutos indicate which notes are the melody, the part that you want to bring out to the forefront. Check out the first phrasing exercise. This is all in your left hand. Essentially, all I did was take an excerpt from the etude and delete the right hand so that you can focus on the phrasing that happens exclusively in the left hand. The tenuto should always stand out from the notes that are around them. But one of the really cool challenges of this etude is you want the melody to always be really clear and easy to hear. But you also want to have slight variations in how loud or quiet each of those melodic notes are, the notes with the tenutos over them, so that the melody has a direction and a shape. In this particular phrase, for instance, I like to think of the third, fourth, and fifth notes as echoes of the second note. When you move on to the next phrasing exercise, you'll bring your right hand into the mix. And when you do so, just make sure that the right hand stays quiet enough to still sound like accompaniment, so that it's not competing with the melodic line. And of course, like we've been talking about all along, stick heights are what really make the distinction between the melodic line and the accompaniment line. So pay attention to how I'm managing the stick heights in my left hand and right hand to bring out the line that I want to hear. There are also a couple of accents thrown into this etude. And when a composer asks for you to play both accents and tenutos, it's important to make a distinction between the two. The accents that happen in this etude are sort of like exclamation points or little surprises. The last thing that we'll talk about is double lateral strokes when there's a really narrow interval in your hand. So we're going to look at measure 41 in the etude as an example. As you can see, I've already put a lot of thought into my body position with this particular measure. I have to have my body pretty far over to the left so that I can get my mallets above the playing areas that I want to for these notes. Also notice that the wrist turn I need to play this narrow interval in my right hand, the minor third, is pretty exaggerated. It's almost a kind of a whipping motion. Compare that to the same dynamic but with a wider interval of a perfect fifth. need a kind of an exaggerated wrist turn to play a double lateral stroke at this narrow interval. And I bring it up because I see a lot of beginning players not doing that, using a wrist turn that's not quite enough on these narrow intervals. And what happens when you do that is the sound is weak, and that's not what you're going to want at this point in the piece. That's it for this lesson. Be sure to watch the video of my complete performance of this etude. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.